These videos are offered on a pay-what-you-like basis. You can pay for the use of the videos at my website. There's a link to my website in the annotation. The address is www.freelance-teacher.com/videos.htm. Or you can just use the link in the annotation. Thank you. All right, so the next chapter is called Plant Responses to Internal and External Signals. So again, we're going to we won't have time to go over all the objectives, but I'll try to pick out the ones that seem most likely to come up on the exam. Let's see. So oftentimes the plant is, some of the cells in the plant are going to have to send a signal to other cells in the plant. Or the plant might have some stimulus. So for example, if you touch a plant, it might respond to that stimulus. Or the plant might respond to gravity, or this plant might respond to light. For example, the plant would tend to want to turn towards light, right?
Yes.
So how does the plant know, for example, to turn towards the light? That's what this type of chapter is about. So we go over first the 3 basic stages of signal transduction.
Yes.
So the first stage is, do you happen to remember these?
Yes. Reception. Transduction. Oh, sorry.
That's good.
And response.
Good. So reception is when the signal is received by the cell. Transduction is transmitting the signal, and then the response is how the cell is going to respond to that signal. Okay, good. Let's see. So what are some signals that a cell could receive? Well, one of the major signals that the chapter covers is light. If the cell or the plant is hit by light, the plant wants to respond to that, for example, by turning towards the light. But another very important type of signal is a hormone. A hormone is a chemical that is secreted in one part of the plant, and then it travels to another part of the plant to bring a message or a signal to that other part of the plant. So let's move on to the idea of hormones. So the chapter covers 6 classes of plant hormones. Do you remember any of those major classes of plant hormones?
Yeah. Well, auxins.
Yeah, this is one of the key types. Good. What would be another type?
Gibberellins.
What would be another type?
What was it? Auxins, gibberellins. There's another one. I forgot the name. It's like cytokinins.
Good. Cytokinins. Good. Any others?
Abscisic acid.
Excellent. Good.
Ethylene.
Well, I think that's, oh, nope. One more to go. Can you remember the last one?
I know it's a It has steroids. I forgot like the front of it, like the beginning of the word. Brassino. Or...
That is the beginning.
That is okay.
Okay. All right. Well, one of the objectives for this chapter is list 6 classes of plant hormones. So there's a good chance there's going to be a problem on the test where you simply, as part of the answer, have to list these 6 classes. So we definitely need to memorize these. Auxin. I'm sorry, you were saying?
Are they going to ask to give an example or explain what it is? Probably.
Absolutely. So we'll try to move on to that as we go. But I'm sure part of the credit will just be listing the names. So that's the first step. Okay, so I think you remembered auxin, gibberellins. Here's cytokinins, abscisic acid, ethylene, brassinosteroids. Okay, so first things first, why don't you stare at these 6 for a few seconds until you feel you have them memorized.
Okay.
So when you feel you have them memorized, let me know.
All right.
Okay, very good. So let's move to your screen now. Okay, good. Give yourself some space. So please list 6 classes of plant hormones.
Okay.
Okay, let's see. Okay, that's good. All right, those are good names, and you spelled them all correctly as well. That's good. They're all every single one is correctly spelled, I think. Very good. Okay, so that's one thing. So how should you review this? Well, tomorrow you should take a blank piece of paper and try to write down these names from memory, and then the next day you should take a blank piece of paper and try to write down the names from memory. And then again, I guess the next day is the test. But the point is, the way to remember this type of thing is to just keep writing it down. Just looking at our notes is not enough. All right, I'll go back to my screen. Okay, so continuing. Now, the next objective is to describe the major functions of the hormones. So if you could only describe one major function of auxin, can you remember any of the key major functions of auxin?
It's what allows the stem to grow.
Okay, good. That's right. Now, the textbook focuses more on describing that as cell elongation. But of course, part of the stem growing could be facilitated by the cell elongating. If the cells are elongating, then the stem can elongate as well. Okay. And we also want to note, when possible, let's see, where these are going to be produced. So auxin has a particular location where it's produced. Have you learned that?
Yeah, it's... Oh, should I tell you?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's in the shoots. The there's a word. The meristems of the plant. Oh, apical. That was the word.
Good. That's right. What is the shoot apical meristem? That's the part where the shoot is getting taller, basically. That's creating new cells to lengthen the shoot at the end of the shoot. So that's typically where the auxin is going to be produced. Okay, well, we could go into more detail about that, but let's make sure we have the key details for the other hormones first. So if you were going to give just one key function of cytokinin, what might that be?
Isn't that what allows them for the cells to divide?
Cell division, yes.
Okay.
It's really hard to summarize these in just a couple terms because they often have many confusing and conflicting roles. But for the exam, we want to boil it down to what's most likely to be helpful for us in the test. So we can say cytokinin is especially involved in cell division. Okay, good. Can you remember anything else about cytokinin besides that cell division idea?
Doesn't it also allow growth? Or no, it was
I'm sorry, I lost my connection there for a second. Could you repeat that?
Oh, I said does it allow? I said growth, but I think it was germination. Or I forgot.
Okay, I think you might be thinking about a different one. So something that might come up there is it also can play an anti-aging role.
Okay.
And the way this comes up is this is something that oftentimes, for example, a florist might spray on their flowers to keep them fresh. Basically, obviously, if you're a florist, you want to keep your flowers fresh. So they might spray a spray that has cytokinin in it to keep the flowers fresh.
Okay. Wait, I thought that was okay. I thought that was added. Gibberellins, acid.
Well, when we get to those, we'll try to clarify the distinctions.
Okay.
Notice that some of the roles that we're talking about here are ways that plants use the hormones, but also you might be tested on how humans can use these hormones. So obviously cytokinin didn't evolve to be used by florists, but now a florist can use a spray that has that to help keep their flowers fresh. In general, it has a type of anti-aging effect on the tissues of the flower. All right, there's certainly other things we can say about cytokinin, but before we get drowning in the details, let's move on and make sure we have the key ideas for the other hormones. So how would you summarize the key function of gibberellins?
Isn't the gibberellin hormone used for for the fruit to grow? It stimulates the growth.
Excellent. Notice how that's not quite the same as the cytokinin, which is anti-aging. So we don't want to confuse those. Those are two different things. This might be used by the florist just to keep the flowers looking fresh, not to make them huge. If you actually want the fruit to grow, the gibberellins are a hormone that can promote that. Excellent. Good. All right. I think that's one function that's likely to be tested. Anything else about any other functions for gibberellins?
Well, don't they also allow for this? Basically, don't the stems grow too?
Yeah.
Since the fruit grows itself.
Another function would be stem growth. Yes. Notice that most of these hormones are a type of growth hormone. Mm-hmm. Most of them are growth hormones in some way, so there's a lot of overlap between them. There's a lot of overlap because they mostly are all causing growth in some way. So the textbook also says these are involved in stem growth, fruit growth, and the textbook mentions one other function that might be tested here. Any recollection of that?
Does that would it stimulate like the embryo to grow? Or
that's definitely on the right track. Excellent.
Okay.
Yes.
What it becomes?
What's this? There's a particular term that we're going for here. At what point is the embryo going to grow when it's stimulated by gibberellin?
Oh, the seed.
Yeah. What do we
Okay.
call it when the seed grows or when the embryo grows inside the seed?
Fertilization.
Actually, that's an incorrect use of the term. Fertilization, remember, is just when we form the zygote at the beginning. So what we're going for... Sorry?
Germination?
Germination, yeah. That's something we didn't have time to talk about when we were talking about the reproduction chapter, but that's actually an important term. So there's some overlap here between these. So let's review, that was a good time to review that. So earlier we were talking about how double fertilization creates the zygote, which grows into the embryo. And remember, the embryo is inside of the seed. But remember, the embryo does not grow very much originally inside the seed. You don't want it to grow until the seed has found a new location that's good for growth. Mm-hmm. The seed has to find a new location that's going to be well suited for growth. So remember that hopefully, for example, an animal might eat the fruit and then carry the seed away somewhere else. And then when the animal eliminates the seed, that's going to grow in the soil. If the seed finds some good soil and a good location, then the embryo might start growing in that new location. And what do we call that process where the seed has found a new location and now the embryo is growing? That's the germination of the seed. Okay. That's actually something that there's some details of that might be tested on the exam, but we didn't have time to go into those details in the reproduction chapter. But anyway, so what is germination? Germination is basically when the embryo inside the seed starts to develop into the seedling in the plant. Mm-hmm. So some terms that are important not to confuse. It's important not to confuse pollination with fertilization. And it's important not to confuse fertilization with germination. So germination is the growth, basically it's the growth of the seed into the plant, or it's the growth of the embryo inside the seed into the plant. Mm-hmm. Okay, so does the gibberellin cause or delay germination?
It causes it.
Yeah, that's important. Or it helps to cause germination. So if the seedling is in a very dry, inhospitable area, should it be secreting or not secreting gibberellin?
If it's in a
So
dry area?
Yeah, if it's in the dry area, is that a good place or a bad place for the seed to grow?
Bad place?
Yeah. So would the seed want to germinate or not germinate?
It won't germinate?
Yeah. Then suppose that there's a season of heavy rainfall so that the seed can sense there's a lot of water. Does it want to germinate now?
Not necessarily to overgrow, I guess.
I guess I'm not describing this very clearly, but my point is, when is the seed likely going to grow? When it senses that the environment is dry or when the environment is moist?
When it's moist.
That's right, because it's going to need water to grow. Mm-hmm. So when it senses a dry environment, will it secrete gibberellin?
No.
When it senses a moist environment, will it secrete gibberellin?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Now, there's actually more details the textbook goes into it about exactly the process by which the gibberellin is secreted. We can come back to that later if we have time, but here we're just going over the basic idea. When there's moisture in the environment, when moisture is entering into the seed, when water is entering into the seed, that causes gibberellin to be secreted, which causes germination to continue or to start. Okay, so there's three key areas that I think are likely to be tested for gibberellins. Okay, so what did we say was the key function of auxin?
Allows the stem to elongate, to grow.
The textbook focuses on cell elongation for auxin, but they're similar ideas. Good. How about key functions for, and where is the auxin produced?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Where is the auxin produced in the plant?
Is that in the bud, meristems? No, the shoot apical meristems.
That's right. How about cytokinin? What are a couple key functions for cytokinin?
That allows for cell division.
Good. And we mentioned one other thing that's sometimes tested about cytokinin, a kind of specific use.
For germination.
Try again? No. So that was anti-aging.
Oh,
For
okay.
example, remember that's used by florists.
Anti-aging.
Pretty hard to keep all these straight.
Yeah.
All right. So when you're ready, what are the key functions of cytokinin that might be tested?
Cell division and anti-aging.
Right. And the example that that the textbook often uses is keeping flowers fresh. All right. We went over 3 key functions of gibberellins.
Mm-hmm.
What would those be?
That was germination, fruit growth, and seed growth. Oh wait, did we say no? It was stem growth.
Yeah, just like all of these, it's kind of a growth hormone.
Yeah.
Good. Does it cause or hinder germination?
It causes germination.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Now your textbook focused on one particular example where people use gibberellins to promote fruit growth. And I think that was actually in your PowerPoint notes too, so that might be on the test. Do you remember what's the particular type of fruit that they focused on that people use gibberellins for?
Grapes.
Yeah, especially the Thompson seedless grapes.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a picture in the textbook where they have a bunch of little puny-looking grapes, and then right next to them they have the big, fat-looking grapes. So which grapes got treated with the gibberellins, the puny ones or the fat ones?
Oh, the fat ones.
That's right. So presumably the farmers know that people are more likely to buy their grapes if they're nice and fat-looking, so they tend to treat them with these gibberellin hormones. Okay, good. All right, good. So then another type of hormone is the Brassinosteroids. This is the part that one I think is least likely to be tested in detail on the exam. The textbook doesn't say too much about them. They say that in many ways they're similar to Auxin, I believe. So again, they're a kind of growth hormone that causes cell elongation and division. Mm-hmm. They have some other specific things they do, but I don't think that this is the one that the test is less likely to go into in too much detail. So I'll just say cell elongation and division. It's rather similar to Auxin. We won't spend too much more time on that. But we should at least remember the name. If they ask us to list the major 6 types, this is one of the 6 types. Okay? So what are the functions of cytokinin?
Cell division and what was it? Cell division and allows anti-aging.
Okay, good. Again, the florists spray those on their flowers to keep them from growing old, and so they look good. All right. Okay, your textbook narrowed this one down better for us. They gave just 2 key functions. And either of those, I think, are a good chance of being tested. Do you remember the 2 key functions for abscisic acid?
Doesn't that... What is abscisic acid? Does that also promote... No. Does it allow the plant to grow? Does it help plant to grow?
All right, let's talk about that. So first of all, I think this is largely a growth or anti-growth hormone.
Okay. So it can prevent the plant from growing.
So that was a question. Do you think it's primarily a growth or anti-growth hormone?
Growth.
Now, most of the ones we've seen so far are growth hormones. This is the odd man out. This is the anti-growth hormone.
Okay.
Pretty much every other hormone, all the other 5, tend to stimulate growth in one way or another. But this is, maybe instead of saying anti-growth, I should say it's the slow growth hormone.
Okay.
Okay. So, for example, would this hormone tend to cause or delay seed germination?
Delay seed germination?
That's one of the two key functions the textbook focuses on. Okay, so I think a good essay question on the exam would be something like, describe conditions when a seed would secrete abscisic acid. When would it want to delay? When would a seed want to delay germination?
In dry areas.
A dry environment. Now, of course, once the seed is in a location, if it doesn't like the location, it can't just stand up and walk someplace else, right? So once the seed is in a location, it's usually kind of stuck there. But if the location is not good now, maybe the seed can just wait and twiddle its thumbs for a while, and maybe the location will be better in a few months. Some seeds can last a really long time, maybe more than a year. So if the location is not good now, the seed should just sit there and read a magazine and wait for the location to improve. So if the seed sees that right now it's dry, it wants to wait until maybe the rainy season, and then it can germinate. Okay. Can you think of any other things that would make the location bad for germination besides just being dry? What other things might the seed be looking for?
Wait. What could prevent germination?
Yeah, why else would the seed want to delay germination?
If maybe it's getting too much water.
Yeah, if there's too much water, I suppose that's a possibility. Anything else?
Maybe if the plant is getting attacked.
Now remember, there's no plant right now; it's just a seed.
Oh, okay.
Right. So are you visualizing this? So the point is that there was a fertilization event that created an embryo. The ovary turned into a fruit, perhaps. An animal ate the fruit. It flew away with the seed inside of it. When it eliminated the seed, it deposited it on the ground. Now the seed is out there all on its own, trying to decide what the right time to germinate is. So basically, if the seed can sense, for example, that it's the right time of year, for example, oftentimes the seed is going to want to germinate in the spring, right? Does that make sense? Because the spring, when it's the start of the spring, there's going to be a long period of good weather for the seed to grow. Usually the seed is not going to want to germinate at the very end of the fall, right? If you germinate at the end of the fall, then just as the seed is growing up, it's going to have the harsh conditions of winter.
Okay.
So if the seed, for example, if the seed can sense that the period of cold is ending and now the area is warming up, that's kind of a signal that spring is coming. So that would be an indication again that it's time to grow. So anyway, if the seed is sensing that the current conditions are poor for germination, abscisic acid can delay the seed from germinating. Okay. Good. There's one other function the textbook mentions about abscisic acid. Do you happen to remember that?
No, wait. Doesn't it close the stomata?
Very good, very good. That's definitely what I'm going for. When would it close the stomata? Under what conditions?
Dry.
Good. Okay, there you go. So the textbook calls this drought tolerance, or response. Maybe we'll just call it response to drought.
Does that prevent like any water from leaving the plant?
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
Do you remember what the stomata are? They're basically little holes in the leaves through which water might be lost.
Yes.
So your answer was correct. So yeah, in very dry conditions, the plant has to work hard to hold on to as much water as possible. So the stomata are going to narrow or close so that the plant will lose less water. Okay, good. So that was a good answer. And notice that's, again, a kind of a slowing of growth. So as long as you're in those drought conditions, the plant is almost going to go into a kind of hibernation.
Okay.
Okay. Because it has to close the stomata to avoid losing water. Now that has a downside too, because the purpose of the stomata is to allow the plant to bring in carbon dioxide, right? The reason they have the stomata in the first place is to bring in carbon dioxide that the plant needs for photosynthesis. So if it has to close the stomata to avoid losing water, it's not going to be able to do much photosynthesis, and therefore it's not going to have much energy. So it's going to have to go into a kind of almost like hibernation. Okay, so both of these are a type of slowing of the growth hormones. Okay, good. So what are the functions of abscisic acid?
To slow the growth hormones to prevent growth, to delay seed germination, and it's what is activated in response to dry conditions.
Good. So there are really two functions that are both a part of slowing growth.
Yeah. Yes.
So my point is, we're trying to compare these to the other hormones. All the other hormones tend to promote growth. All the other hormones tend to promote growth. This is the only one that's mainly preventing growth. That's not quite right. Most of the other hormones are promoting growth. Most of the other ones, there maybe one other that has a lot of slow growth aspects. Okay. So what's the function of auxin?
The auxins, they allow stem growth.
And cell elongation. Good.
Yes.
And where is it produced?
In the shoot apical meristems.
Very good. What could we say about cytokinin?
They allow cell division.
Good.
And they are used for anti-aging.
Good, like keeping flowers fresh. Okay, that's a good answer. We also talked about gibberellins.
Gibberellins, they also allow the stems to grow.
Good.
They allow the seed to grow.
What's the name of that process where the seed grows?
Germination.
That's right. Germination. So it's not exactly the seed that's growing, but the embryo within the seed grows into the plant then. Okay, good. So germination. One other thing I think for gibberellins.
Fruit growth.
Good, like the Thompson grapes. Okay, good. The Brassinosteroids, we said there's not too much to say about them. They're kind of, again, a kind of a growth hormone. What are the functions of abscisic acid?
It slows down the growth hormones. When it's in dry conditions, it'll delay germination and it closes the stomata.
Under what types of conditions?
Under dry conditions?
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, good. So what's the last hormone we haven't talked about for a while?
Ethylene.
Very good. One interesting thing about ethylene is that ethylene is a gas. So that's different from the other hormones that we've talked about. The formula for ethylene is this. Not that you're going to be tested on that, but it's just a small organic molecule that has this Lewis structure. Okay, so the textbook goes over, I think, 4 very specific functions of ethylene. So can you remember any of those specific functions of ethylene?
Only thing I remember, I remember it's a gas.
So far, so good? Do you remember any of the functions?
Is it similar to gibberellins or?
It's kind of its own kind of guy. So one key that's likely to come up is what's called the triple response to mechanical stress.
So it does 3 of what the other hormones do?
Well, we'll have to go into that in more detail. So here's one of the functions, triple response to mechanical stress. So this is what happens. So remember what happens during, so let's say that a shoot is growing higher. So that the shoot is growing. So it's growing like this, or maybe the seedling is growing. And let's say that it encounters an obstacle. Maybe that this might be like the branch of another tree that it bumps into. So let's say that we encounter an obstacle. Well, what would be good for this plant here would be it doesn't want to just keep trying to grow up through the obstacle, right? So do you see, this would be called mechanical stress. It's hit something else. That's the mechanical stress. And then there are three responses to that. First of all, there's a slowing of the growth. It's hit an obstacle, so it has to slow down. Also, there's a thickening of the stem. Thickening makes it stronger. Why does it have to be stronger? Because it's hitting an obstacle. You don't want it to be broken or injured brushing up against this obstacle, so it needs to thicken. And then most important and most logical, it needs to curve. Like so, because there's no point trying to just grow straight up through the obstacle, right? So instead it starts curving, and it maintains this curved growth until the plant senses that the obstacle is not there anymore. And then it can start growing up again. And at this point would be the end of the triple response. So the third response, the most logical and most important, is curving. Or maybe, let me just put it curved. Curving. So the stem grows horizontally.
Okay.
And that's kind of the end of the triple response, and it'll keep growing horizontally until it senses that it's moved around the obstacle. So this is called a mechanical stress because hitting the obstacle puts mechanical stress on the growing seedling. It has to respond. It responds to that by slowing its growth, because it has to. It doesn't want to just try plowing right through the obstacle. It thickens the stem so that it'll be stronger and it won't get injured while it's moving around the obstacle and brushing up against the obstacle. And most important, it curves so that it starts growing horizontally, because otherwise there's no way it can get around the obstacle. And what is it that causes the plant to take all of these measures? Well, the secretion of ethylene. So when the plant hits the obstacle, ethylene is going to be secreted, and then the ethylene causes all three of these responses.
Okay.
So in this case, there's a triple response to the ethylene. Okay. Okay. So so one of the functions of what's the function of ethylene that we've talked about so far?
Curving the stem.
Yeah. Well, basically, this is the triple response to mechanical stress. What do they mean by mechanical stress? What's the mechanical stress?
The obstacle.
Hitting the obstacle. Yeah. And then why do they call it a triple response? What are the three responses?
It slows down the growth. It allows the stem to thicken, and then the stem it begins to curve around the obstacle, and then after it gets past the obstacle, it starts growing vertically again.
That's right. That would be the end of the triple response. Okay. All right. So that's one of the key ideas. Now, this is not three different functions. These are three parts of one function. Okay.
Okay.
Does that make any sense?
Yes.
All right. Well, then we're on to function number 2. Function number 2 is apoptosis. Do you remember that term? Okay. Do you remember what apoptosis means?
Yes.
What's it mean?
Isn't that signaling? Isn't that cell death?
Yeah. Or to be more dramatic, cell suicide. Because apoptosis is when the cell basically kills itself on purpose. Okay. So this might seem counterintuitive, but sometimes the plant wants some of its cells to kill themselves. So for example, when you're shedding leaves in the autumn, you can have the leaf cells start to kill themselves as the leaf is falling off. Or another example that the book gave is sometimes the plant has to form vessels that can carry fluids. Well, the vessels are basically just hollow elements. So as the vessel is formed, the vessel is going to be formed out of living cells. But then when the vessel has been formed, it basically needs just to be hollowed out and turned into a dead hollow tube. So that can involve apoptosis to kill the cells in that vessel element. Okay, there's many other cases where it might be necessary to have a part of the cell kill itself as well. So what would be the name of a hormone that would cause apoptosis?
Oh, ethylene?
That's right. So ethylene is the key hormone here that causes cell suicide. Okay, good. So what are the two functions of ethylene that we've talked about so far?
It causes, well, one of them was it does I forgot the triple response, and
Good.
that's when
Triple response to mechanical stress. Good.
yes, and that's what allows the plant when it faces the obstacle, the plant begins to grow vertically. Then the plant begins to thicken. Oh wait, no. Once the plant faces the obstacle, the plant begins to thicken. It begins to grow horizontally away from the obstacle until it's away from the obstacle, and then the third is when and then it starts curving, and then it starts growing vertically again.
Okay, there's a little confusion there. When it starts growing vertically again, that's not really considered part of the triple response. That's the end of the triple response. So the one that you were missing there was just the slowing of growth.
Oh yeah, slowing.
So there's a slowing of the stem's elongation, a thickening of the stem, and then a curving. So I memorized this as slowing, thickening, curving. So what are the three elements of the triple response?
Slowing down of the stem growth, the thickening of the stem once it faces the obstacle, the stem slows down, it thickens, and then curves around the obstacle.
Good. By growing horizontally until it's gotten around it. Okay, very good. What was another function of ethylene besides the triple response?
Apoptosis.
There you go.
Cell suicide.
That's right. Okay, well, ethylene has still two more functions. So another function has the very fancy name of leaf abscission. Do you know what that means? That's actually a very simple process.
Abscission is I'm probably thinking incision, so it's wrong.
So this is just when the tree or the plant loses leaves in the fall.
Okay.
So this is just the leaves falling off. So this is a kind of a very pompous name for the leaves falling off in the autumn. So what's the hormone that causes the leaves to fall off the tree?
Ethylene?
Ethylene, that's right. So notice, are we seeing here that ethylene seems more like a pro-growth or slow-growth hormone?
It's slow growth?
Yeah, actually, all right, I take that back. It has a mixture of things. I would say the triple response tends to slow growth. Apoptosis certainly seems like it's a kind of an anti-growth. Leaf abscission is kind of an anti-growth hormone. It's done when it's time for the plant to go into a kind of hibernation for the winter. But maybe I shouldn't. So far they're like that. But the fourth one isn't quite like that. Okay, but anyway, it tends to cause the leaves to fall off during the fall. Remember, what is the purpose of leaves? The purpose of leaves is to store chlorophyll that gets hit by light to facilitate photosynthesis, which provides nutrients to the plant, right? the whole reason that it has leaves is to expose them to the sunlight. We talked about what flowers are for, right? Flowers are for reproduction. What are leaves for? Well, leaves are for photosynthesis, for converting sunlight into chemical energy. But in the winter, there's not going to be much sunlight, right? In the winter, there's not going to be much sunlight, so the tree and the plant kind of shuts down to some extent, and it makes sense for it to lose its leaves. There's no point there's no point providing nutrients to leaves. They're not going to be paying their own way by absorbing a lot of sunlight. So that's the reason why some trees lose their leaves in the fall. They lose their leaves in the fall because they're not going to be much use to them during the winter anyway, because there's not as much sunlight during the winter. And so since you don't want to keep providing nutrients to the leaves that are not going to be very useful anyway, ethylene causes the leaves to fall off. All right, very good. So then there's one more function for ethylene, which is fruit ripening.
Okay, so that's the opposite one. That stimulates growth.
So this can be secreted to help the fruit ripen. So thinking about the process for this, where does the fruit come from? What part of the plant develops into the fruit?
The seed.
Take your time. Actually, that's not correct. What part of the plant develops into the fruit? And this is something we were talking about earlier today. What part of the flower develops into the fruit?
Oh, jeez. Wait, embryo? Am I thinking?
Let's review that a little bit. So remember that the ovule turns into the seed.
Oh, the ovary turns into the seed.
That's right. Yeah, it can be hard to keep all of these things straight, right? That's why really continual repetition is necessary. So which part of the plant turns into the fruit?
The ovary?
That's right. What is the purpose of the fruit?
To be eaten by the animal, and in the hope that the animal will eliminate the seed, allowing it to grow in other places.
Good, that's right. Or sometimes the fruit is carried away by the wind. But yeah, oftentimes the fruit is going to be eaten by an animal. So the point is, when the seed is ready to be carried away, that's when the fruit wants to ripen. Right? You wouldn't want the fruit to ripen when before. You certainly wouldn't want the fruit to ripen before fertilization has occurred. Right? It would be pointless for the fruit to ripen before fertilization. But after fertilization has occurred, when the seed is ready to proceed with the next stage of growth, that's when the fruit needs to ripen, so it can attract an animal, for example, to eat it. Okay, very good. So I think we've now discussed the 4 key functions of ethylene. So, can you remember what's one of the key functions of ethylene?
It's the 3 responses to stress mechanics.
Triple response to mechanical stress. Good. So what's involved in that? And that's a term that your instructor is probably going to want you to use on the exam. That's why we keep repeating it. So what's involved in that triple? When does the triple response occur?
It occurs when the plant faces an obstacle.
Good. And then what does it do? What is the triple response?
First the stem will thicken. And then the plant. Well, no. Actually, the stem growth slows down, and then the stem will thicken, and then it will grow horizontally until it. Then the third part is when it curves around the obstacle and then begins to grow vertically again.
That sounds good. Okay, that's the triple response. So that's the first function, triple response to mechanical stress. What's the second function?
Apoptosis.
Good. And what does that mean?
Cell suicide.
Very good. All right. And what's another function?
Fruit ripening.
Good. And another function?
Oh wow. Wait. I just need a second. It's when leaf abscission, when the leaves fall off from the tree.
Good. Good. Excellent. Okay, very good. All right, so name a hormone, plant hormone.
Any hormone? Auxin.
What's the key function for auxin?
Cell elongation.
And what's the key part of the plant where it's produced?
In the shoot apical meristem.
Okay, so those are some of the key ideas about auxins. Let's name another hormone.
Cytokinin.
Okay, so what are some of the key functions we talked about for cytokinin?
That allows for cell division. And promotes anti-aging.
So what would be a commercial use for cytokinin?
To keep flowers fresh.
Good. Okay. So let's name another key hormone.
Gibberellins.
All right. What would be some key functions for gibberellins?
That promotes elongation. And germination.
Does it cause or delay germination?
Causes germination.
What's the most important stimulus that would cause the gibberellin to be secreted to cause germination?
Stimulus would be for growth. Seed growth.
Okay, I think we're getting confused by that question. Well, let's see. Let's go back. So, any other functions for gibberellins besides what I've written down here?
Elongation, germination. Wait.
You might have already mentioned it, but here's two functions I've written down. There's one more function that's worth writing down here.
Is it fruit growth?
That's right. Good. What's the example your textbook uses for gibberellins used for fruit growth?
The grapes.
Good. Okay. What's another? Okay. So let's talk about this germination again. So what's the main signal to the seed that it's a good time for it to germinate? Or what's the key event?
When the environment is moist.
Yeah, especially when water is entering into the seed. This is something that we didn't have time to talk about in the reproduction chapter, but it's pretty important. So seed germination begins when water enters the seed. There's a specific term that's used for when water is taken up by the seed. You happen to remember that term? It's a term we haven't talked about before. But do you know what the technical term is for when the seed takes up water?
I forget.
Have you seen this term in class?
Yeah.
Okay, this is a term that's likely to come up on the test. So this term was, we didn't talk about this in the reproduction chapter because we didn't really get to the section on seed germination. But if we had, this would have been an important part of that. An important part of seed germination, the first stage of seed germination is, it's hard to pronounce, imbibition. All right, so what is imbibition?
Imbibition is when when the water basically moves through the seed.
Into the seed. Yes. Go. Good. So. So if water moves into the seed, is that a signal that it's a good or a bad time to germinate?
It's a good time to germinate.
Good. So then the embryo is going to release a hormone to facilitate germination. What's the hormone the embryo will release in response to the water entering into the seed?
Gibberellin.
Right. And then the gibberellin induces the next steps in germination. So this is a little flow chart that would be good to have in your notes here. This is kind of a connection between the reproduction chapter that we talked about previously and the hormone chapter here. So we were just talking about this little flow chart. So you might see a question on the test that said something like, outline the process of the beginning of germination or something like that. So here's some key things you'd want to mention in an essay answer there. Actually, there's more we could do. You could take this a little bit further and describe what happens after germination has begun, but we're not going to get into those details right now. But anyway, I thought this was a good time to go over this term, imbibition. That's likely to be important on the test. Okay. So what does the term imbibition mean?
It's when water enters the seed.
That's right. And how does the seed respond after imbibition?
The embryo will release the gibberellin hormone.
Good. Which causes?
Germination.
Okay, very good. All right, so that was a little bit of a digression. So you'd already correctly told me that the gibberellins cause germination, but we wanted to give some more details that would be helpful on the test for that process. So here's the details. Okay, so I think now we've summarized the gibberellins. So we reviewed auxin, cytokinin, gibberellins. Can you remember another type of hormone that I don't have listed on the screen yet?
Well, we just abscisic acid.
Okay, so what are the key functions for abscisic acid?
It closed. Well, the stomata will close during dry environment.
Good.
Also, it slows down germination. Well, it stops. Well, I guess you could say slow down.
Let's say delays. So yeah, once the germination has started, there wouldn't be much point to slowing it. So it's kind of an all or nothing thing. So it simply delays germination and prevents it from happening. So what would be the name of the hormone that has the opposite effect of abscisic acid on germination?
Gibberellin.
That's right. That would be a good test question. Good. Okay, that's it for the abscisic acid. So name another hormone that I haven't written on the screen yet.
Brassinosteroids.
What's the key function for that?
Cell division.
So we didn't really go into much detail about that. But it's similar in some ways to auxin, cell division and elongation. All right, so what's another hormone I haven't written on the screen yet?
Ethylene.
Okay. What's a function of ethylene?
Fruit ripening.
Good.
Apoptosis.
What does that mean?
Self-suicide.
Very good. How about another function?
The triple response to stress, mechanical stress.
That's the right name. That's a name you're probably the instructor probably wants us to know. So that's right. Triple response to mechanical stress. What does that mean?
That's when the stem faces an obstacle. The stem begins to slow its growth, and then it thickens. Well, it slows its growth, thickens, and then curves to grow horizontally. And then once it gets past the obstacle, it starts to grow vertically again.
Excellent. So to be specific, what are the 3 specific responses? 1, 2, and 3?
Slow growth, slow stem growth.
Good.
What was the second one? Slow stem growth. Wow, I just forgot it.
You actually mentioned it a second ago. I just want to make sure we're labeling these each clearly.
Curving of the stem. The stem thickening. That was a B.
That's right.
Stem thickening.
Why does it help to thicken?
Because it allows the stem to stay in that position.
Not quite. It's just basically it makes it stronger.
Okay.
Remember, it's brushing up against this obstacle,
Mm-hmm.
so it needs to be stronger so it doesn't get injured or broken as it's brushing up against the obstacle.
Mm-hmm.
So the thickening is also a strengthening. Okay, this is a pretty important one. I'm sure there'll be a test question that involves this triple response. All right, any other functions of ethylene?
Leaf abscission. And that's when the leaves fall off the tree because during the cold seasons there's not much sunlight, so nutrients don't need to be given to the leaves.
That's right. Good. Okay, very good. All right, so so we just went over all of these. Obviously, these are going to be important. So the key thing is after we hang up, it would be good to take a blank piece of paper and write all of these down all over again. And then tomorrow, you should write all of them down, just pretty much exactly like I have on the screen right here.
Mm-hmm.
Write them all down from memory. And then the next day, take a blank piece of paper and write them all down from memory, and then the test is coming. Now, one thing to warn you of is there's more details that could definitely be tested. What I wanted to do first was not to get lost in the details. What I've been trying to do here is go over the most important basic ideas. Mm-hmm. But there are definitely more details that you could get into. But there's not much point in going into those details until we have these basic ideas down. So those are the basic ideas. Okay, so as far as objectives, we talked about number 1, 3 basic stages of signal transduction. It looks like you already had those down. Mm-hmm. Number 2, we didn't get to. Number 3 is the main thing we were focusing on here today. 6 classes of plant hormones. We certainly talked about this. What's the function of gibberellin? We haven't really talked about this. We didn't go into... So remember, what was the key function of auxin?
Allows stem elongation, or cell elongation.
Right. However, we didn't get into how it does that. So that's another thing that might be tested that we didn't quite get to. We did talk about the functions of gibberellin. We definitely talked about this, the role of ethylene, the triple response, apoptosis, leaf abscission. So notice those are things you definitely want to be familiar with. Yeah. So I think we did a pretty good job on that. How about this? Well, how would you answer this?
Describe it as a resistant helps prepare plant for winter. For sure, abscisic acid allows the stomata to close, preventing water from...
Yeah, because the winter might be a drier season,
yeah,
and the plant is going to be kind of shutting down and not needing as much energy. Also, it might help. It would help a seed prepare for winter by making sure it doesn't germinate during the winter as well. Number 9, obviously, we didn't get to here. So we talked a couple of these we got into, a couple we didn't quite get into yet. Okay, so some of these we got to, and some we didn't get to quite yet. Anyway, the most important thing here is to review. Definitely, pretty much, so I tried to focus on the stuff that's most important. Pretty much everything we talked about should be helpful on the test. But you can see it's really easy to start forgetting the material. So this screen here is the key thing to have memorized. You should be able to come up with everything from here, from memory. You just have to keep reviewing that over and over to prevent it from getting confused. We also talked about this idea of imbibition that we didn't have time to talk about before. So remember again, the first thing we're going to do is do a little quiz on what we covered in our last 2 sessions. So I'm going to ask you some questions about the plant reproduction chapter. And I'm also going to ask you some questions about the cell, the plant hormone chapter as well. And if it seems like we're not remembering that material, then we'll spend some more time on that. Basically, I just want to be sure that we're at least remembering what we've already gone over. So hopefully you'll have some time to review between today and tomorrow what we just talked about. Try to find the time to actually carefully review between today and tomorrow what we just talked about. Remember, the way to review it is to actually write it down on paper. Try writing down all the different ideas we talked about the hormones. The only way to really memorize this material is to just keep writing it down over and over. And then in tomorrow's session, I guess I'll ask you some questions about that again. Like I said, try to find the time to carefully review what we already talked about, because there's not too much point going on to new material unless we have this down. Remember, pretty much everything we've been talking about is stuff you've already heard in class anyway, but a lot of it got forgotten. So our goal here is just to give you the material in an organized fashion so that you can work on memorizing it. But so in the tutoring, I try to really promote understanding and help you to understand the material. But the fact is, a lot of this class is about memorization, and that just takes time. So you try to find the time to really memorize this material so we can build on that. What's one of the main types of plant hormones?
Auxin.
Okay, good. And then what have we said was the key function for auxin?
The key function of auxin is cell elongation.
Good. And what's the key location where auxin is created?
The shoot apical meristem.
Okay, what's another type of plant hormone?
Gibberellin.
What would be a key function of gibberellin?
Gibberellin would be for fruit growth, seed growth.
Basically, they just say fruit growth. Good. Anything else besides fruit growth?
It activates germination.
That's right. We were just talking about that, weren't we? Right. So it activates germination in response to imbibition. So when gibberellin is secreted, what does it cause to happen next?
When gibberellin is secreted, it causes the seed to grow, basically the fruit to grow, and for the seed to grow.
Let's be careful. So it wouldn't make sense to say that the fruit and the seed are 2 very different things, right? What's the purpose of the fruit?
To be eaten.
And what's that purpose? To get the seed transported someplace else. So the gibberellin does not. So anyway, I can see why you're saying that. But these 2 functions are totally different from each other. The fruit growth function is totally separate from the germination function. Those happen at 2 totally different times. So during germination, remember we were just talking about those slides. Water is imbibed, so that causes gibberellin to be secreted. And then what does the gibberellin cause? What's the direct effect of the gibberellin?
The direct effect of the gibberellin is fruit growth.
That actually what I was trying to say is that's a completely separate idea from what we're talking about now.
Oh.
So gibberellin has 2 key effects. It causes the fruit to grow, and in a completely separate effect that occurs at a totally different time, it also activates germination. Do you see how these are totally different things? Which of these 2 things happens first, fruit growth or germination?
Germination.
Well, I guess it depends how you're counting. But the way we've been talking about it, first the fruit has to grow so that it can be eaten by an animal, so the animal can carry the seed someplace else, so it can expel the seed, so then the seed can germinate. So if you look at it that way, would you agree that the fruit growth happens before the germination?
Okay, yes.
Yeah, okay. But anyway, they're two completely different processes. So it's true that gibberellin can stimulate fruit growth, but that's completely different from activating germination. Right now we're talking about activating germination. So remember, we were just talking about that essay question we expect to see on the exam. You expect to see a question about the mobilization of nutrients during germination. So remember, the first step of that is imbibition. Then imbibition causes gibberellin to be secreted. What was going to be the next step of your essay answer? What is the next direct effect of gibberellin during germination?
The enzyme will be released.
Yeah, what's the name of that enzyme?
Wow. Acetylene?
Amylase.
Amylase.
Okay. Well, anyway, since you know that's going to be on the test, that's an important thing to go back and review. You want to have a good detailed answer for your essay answer. So that's what I was trying to elicit here. What I was saying is that the gibberellin activates germination, so to be, and that causes the amylase. So imbibition causes gibberellin to be released, then the gibberellin causes amylase to be released. Then that digests the endosperm. That was the process we were just talking about a moment ago. Okay, so maybe we should review that again. What does imbibition mean?
Water entering the cell.
The seed.
Or the endosperm.
The seed. Imbibition is when water enters the seed. And then that would induce, what's the next step in the process of the mobilization of nutrients?
The gibberellin hormone is released from the endosperm.
It's actually not released from the endosperm. It's released by the embryo.
Oh, yeah.
And then the next step.
And that causes the enzyme amylase to be released from the outer layer of the seed or the endosperm.
That's right. And then what?
And then the enzyme will break down the molecules inside of the endosperm in order to produce sugars.
Good.
And that sugar will allow the embryo to grow.
Okay, good. So do you have that in your notes? Here's the process. Do you have that in your notes?
Yes, I'm writing it.
Okay, so take your time. Stare at that for a while. Like I said, since we know that's going to be on the test, we may as well make sure we have it memorized right now. So stare at that for a while and tell me when you feel you have that down.
Okay.
Okay, very good. So what we're talking about here is germination. So what was the first step that initiates germination in the process we were just talking about?
Fruit growth. Basically, the mobilization of nutrients inside the seed.
Okay, I think we're getting confused there. First of all, fruit growth would definitely be a completely incorrect answer. Because remember, fruit growth is totally separate from germination. Do you see what I would say that? Fruit growth is a totally different process from germination. Fruit has to grow so that then the fruit can be eaten or carried by an animal. And then the animal deposits the fruit somewhere else. And then only then does germination occur. So fruit growth is completely different from germination. Why are we getting them confused? Because they just happen to both be functions of gibberellin, but they're completely different functions of gibberellin. So one function of gibberellin is fruit growth, and here a completely different function of gibberellin is begin germination or stimulate germination, activate germination. So remember, just a moment ago, we had written out a kind of a flow chart that described step by step what the steps are in the beginning of germination. So I was going to ask you again, what is the very first step in our flow chart at the very beginning of the process of germination that initiates the germination?
The imbibition?
That's right. That's what I was going for. Not fruit growth, but imbibition. All right, so the first step is imbibition. And what does imbibition mean?
Water enters the seed.
That's right. Okay, so let's review that again. What happens next? What's the next step in our flow chart?
Gibberellin is released.
In response to the water. Good. And then?
The enzyme amylase is released.
In response to the gibberellin. Good. And then?
The enzyme amylase breaks down the molecules inside the endosperm to produce sugar.
That's right.
And then the sugar enters the embryo, and that causes the embryo to grow.
The embryo uses the sugar to grow as nutrients. Okay. Okay. Well, I think we're still a little shaky on this, but you can review this on your own. In fact, you can get more details from your textbook since you know that this is going to be tested. But these are the basic ideas behind that and behind those slides that we were looking at. Okay. So what would you say? So far, we've talked about two completely different functions of gibberellin. What's one of the functions of gibberellin?
Fruit growth.
Good. And then we talked about one completely different function of gibberellin. What's the other completely different function of gibberellin?
It activates germination.
That's right. Good. And there is one other key function of gibberellin we should mention. What else does gibberellin do?
Stem growth.
Yeah. Okay. So far we've mentioned auxin and gibberellin. There's 4 more key hormones. What's one more of the key hormones?
Cytokinin.
What would be a key function of cytokinin?
Cell division.
Good. Now, something we didn't talk about last time is we should also talk about what one of the key locations that cytokinin is produced in. One of the key locations is that this is produced in the roots. We didn't mention this last time. There's a couple other locations that can produce cytokinin, but this is what I think is most important in your textbook. So you can compare that with auxin. Where is auxin produced?
Auxin is produced in the shoot apical meristem.
That's right, the shoot apical meristem. And where is cytokinin produced?
In the roots?
That's right, among other places. So, excuse me, is the auxin produced in the top or the bottom of the plant?
I'm sorry?
Is the auxin produced in the top or the bottom of the plant?
Wait a minute. The top of the plant?
Because that's where the shoot apical meristem is, right?
Yeah.
This is the portion of the shoot that is getting longer. Well, that's the portion at the very top of the shoot. And then where is cytokinin produced, at the top or the bottom of the plant?
The bottom.
Okay, so that's just that's a contrast that might be tested. The auxin is produced at the top of the plant, and cytokinin is largely produced at the bottom of the plant. Okay, so that's something that we didn't talk about before. What would be another plant hormone besides these 3?
Brassinosteroids.
What would be a function for those?
That delays seed germination.
Like this?
Delays seed germination.
Okay, what hormone are you talking about now?
Brassinosteroid.
Okay, there we're getting a little confused. So that's
Oh
actually a
wait,
different
no,
one.
that's cell elongation.
Yeah, this is another cell elongation and division. It's pretty similar to Auxin, and the textbook doesn't go into much detail. This is the one we talked about the least. Before I forget, another function of cytokinin we talked about was anti-aging.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about how florists can use it to keep their flowers looking fresh. Okay, so now we have two more. What would be another type of hormone?
Abscisic acid.
Okay, good. What would be a key function for that?
That delays seed germination.
That's the one that delays germination. That's right. And has one other key function.
It's activated in response to dry conditions.
Yeah. Good. So think about this idea that it delays germination. So abscisic acid delays germination, so it's kind of opposite to what other hormone?
Gibberellin.
That's right. Good. Okay, good. So one other hormone?
Ethylene.
That has a bunch of very important functions that are likely to be tested. So what was one of those?
One of them was the triple response mechanism stress.
Triple response
To mechanical stress.
to mechanical stress. What does this mean?
That means
What is this? What's involved with this?
that means the stem will slowly it will slow its growth. The stem will also thicken. And then the stem will curve in response to an obstacle.
Until it gets around the obstacle.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the mechanical stress here?
The obstacle?
Yeah. How does it help for the stem to thicken?
So it's able to strengthen the stem.
Just makes it stronger, yeah. If it's hitting something, it needs to be stronger than normal. Okay, very good. I think there's a good chance that would be tested. What would be another function of ethylene?
Fruit ripening.
Right. Okay, good. And what would be another function of ethylene?
Apoptosis.
Which means?
Cell suicide.
Excellent. Good. And another one?
Leaf abscission.
Good. And that means?
The leaf falling off the tree.
Okay, very good. All right, so for the most part, that was a good recollection of those ideas. Remember, where is cytokinin produced? That's something new that we talked about today.
In the roots?
Yeah. So, good. Cytokinin is mainly produced on the top or the bottom of the plant?
The bottom of the plant.
And how about auxin?
The top of the plant.
Okay.
In the meristem.
Okay, in the plant hormone chapter, we added one new thing last time about cytokinins. We talked about where cytokinins are largely produced. What part of the plant produces cytokinins?
The root.
Yeah, that's one of the main sources of cytokinins in any case. So are cytokinins mainly produced at the top or the bottom of the plant?
The bottom of the plant.
How about auxin?
The top of the plant.
Okay. These videos are offered on a pay-what-you-like basis. You can pay for the use of the videos at my website. There's a link to my website in the annotation. The address is www.freelance-teacher.com/videos.html. or you can just use the link in the annotation. Thank you.